Hello, and welcome to Sleep Science Time. I'm so glad you're here. Really, genuinely glad. Whether you're a familiar face who's been on this journey with me through other videos, or whether you've just stumbled across this video because the algorithm decided tonight was the night you needed to learn about human evolution whilst trying to sleep, you're exactly where you're meant to be. And I want you to know that matters to me. You're not just another view count or a faceless statistic. You're a real person lying there in the dark, probably wondering if you've made a sensible choice clicking on this video about our ancestors when you've got work tomorrow. Tonight's topic is something rather extraordinary when you stop and think about it. Right now, in this moment, you and I are the only human species left on Earth. Homo sapiens. That's us. We're it. But here's the interesting thing. We weren't always alone. For most of human history, we shared this planet with other human species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, all sorts of cousins wandering about. And then, quite recently in evolutionary terms, they all disappeared. Every single one, except us. Why are we the last ones standing? What made us special? Or were we just lucky? And here's where it gets properly fascinating. We didn't just outlast them, we interbred with them. Right now, as you're lying there trying to drift off, bits of Neanderthal DNA are quite literally part of you, influencing everything from your immune system to how your brain works. You're not purely Homo sapiens. None of us are. We're hybrids. Walking, talking proof that human evolution wasn't a neat ladder from ape to modern human, but a messy, complicated web of different species all trying to survive, and occasionally, well, getting rather friendly with each other. I'm curious, what brought you here tonight? Are you fascinated by human origins, the story of where we came from? Or perhaps you're one of those people who's heard the conspiracy theories about ancient aliens or lost civilizations, and you want to know what the science actually says. Maybe you just enjoy falling asleep to deep questions about existence delivered in the most soothing way possible, which is oddly specific, but apparently there's quite a lot of you. Leave me a comment and let me know. I read every single one. And honestly, knowing what brings you to these videos, what questions keep you curious, it makes creating them feel less like shouting into the void and more like having a proper conversation with friends I haven't met yet. And if you find yourself enjoying this peculiar late-night exploration of our evolutionary past, I'd be ever so grateful if you'd tap that like button. It genuinely makes a difference. Helps this channel reach other people who are looking for exactly this sort of thing, science and wonder wrapped up in something calm enough to help you sleep. And if you'd like to make this a regular thing, these gentle wanderings through the mysteries of our universe, do consider subscribing. There's something rather lovely about building a little community of curious minds who gather here in the quiet hours, isn't there? Right, let's talk about what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to start with the proper science, the fossil evidence, the species that came before us. We'll meet Lucy, one of the most famous fossils ever discovered, and we'll trace the journey from her to us, through all the various human species that evolved, survived for hundreds of thousands of years, and then vanished. Then we'll explore some genuine scientific mysteries that even the experts can't quite explain. Like why? If our brains reached full modern size 250,000 years ago, did we not start acting properly human until about 70,000 years ago? What was going on in that 150,000 year gap? Were we just having a very long think? And then, because this is sleep science time and we do eventually venture into the strange and speculative, we'll look at some of the more controversial theories. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, the lost advanced civilizations, all the ideas that make mainstream archaeologists want to lie down in a dark room. But we'll approach them fairly, look at why people find them compelling, and then examine what the actual evidence does and doesn't support. No judgment, just curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism. The goal here, as always, isn't to keep you bolt upright until dawn having an existential crisis about your place in the cosmos. The goal is to give your mind something genuinely fascinating to contemplate as you drift off, something that reminds you that you're part of an extraordinary story that stretches back millions of years. There's something rather comforting about that, right? Whatever you're worried about tomorrow, whatever's weighing on your mind, you're the result of an unbroken chain of survival stretching back to the very first humans. Every single one of your ancestors survived long enough to reproduce. You're made of successful survivors. That's rather remarkable when you think about it. So shall we begin? Let's go back, way back, to a time when Africa was full of upright apes who were just starting to work out that walking on two legs freed up their hands for more interesting things than knuckle walking. Let's meet your very, very distant relatives. Also, if you need to grab a drink, put on your pajamas or whatever you need to do, then go and do that now. Let's start with someone you've probably heard of, even if you've never taken much interest in human evolution. Her name is Lucy, and she's possibly the most famous fossil in the world, which is quite an achievement for someone who's been dead for 3.2 million years. Lucy was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974 by a team led by paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson, and the story goes that they were celebrating the find that evening, playing the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds on repeat, and the name just stuck. So the most important fossil in human evolutionary studies is essentially named after a psychedelic Beatles song, which feels very 1970s, doesn't it? Lucy belongs to a species called Australopithecus afarensis, and she represents a crucial bridge between our ape ancestors and proper humans. When they found her, they'd recovered about 40% of her skeleton, which might not sound like much, but in paleoanthropology, that's extraordinarily complete. Most fossils are just fragments, a bit of jawbone here, a tooth there, and scientists have to piece together entire species from what amounts to evolutionary breadcrumbs. But Lucy gave us enough to understand something profound. She walked upright on two legs, just like we do. Now, walking upright might not seem particularly impressive to you, lying there in bed, probably quite horizontal at the moment, but bipedalism, as scientists call it, was absolutely revolutionary. It freed up the hands for carrying things, using tools, all sorts of possibilities that four-legged creatures simply can't manage. Imagine trying to carry your shopping home if you needed your hands to walk on. You'd have to put the bags down every few steps, or perhaps carry them in your mouth like a particularly ambitious dog. Lucy and her species had solved that problem millions of years ago. But here's the fascinating bit. Lucy wasn't fully committed to the ground-dwelling lifestyle. Her arms were proportionally longer than ours, and her fingers were slightly curved, adaptations for climbing trees. She spent time in the trees, probably sleeping there at night to avoid predators, but she walked upright on the ground. She was living in both worlds, so to speak, 1 foot in the trees, one on the savannah. Well, technically 2 feet on the savannah, but you know what I mean. Her brain was small, about 380 to 530 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a chimpanzee's brain. So Lucy wasn't particularly clever by modern standards. She wasn't pondering the meaning of existence or inventing the wheel. She was eating plants, avoiding being eaten by large cats, and presumably having very straightforward thoughts about where the next meal was coming from. But she was our ancestor, or at least a very close cousin, and her species survived for over 900,000 years. That's longer than we modern humans have been around, which rather puts our achievements in perspective, doesn't it? We've been here for perhaps 300,000 years, and we're already worrying about whether we'll make it to the end of the century. Lucy's lot managed nearly 1,000,000 years just by being decent at walking and not making too much trouble. Right, moving forward in time. About 2.8 million years ago, a new type of human appeared, and this one was different enough that scientists placed it in the same genus as us. Meet Homo habilis, which translates to handy man, and honestly, what a brilliantly optimistic name. Homo habilis had a slightly larger brain than Australopithecus, about 650 cubic centimeters, and more importantly, they made tools. Not sophisticated tools, mind you. We're talking about deliberately chipped stones, pebbles split to create a sharp edge. The Oldowan tools, they're called, named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania where they were first discovered. Now you might think, well, that's not terribly impressive, is it? Hitting rocks together until they break. But creating even simple stone tools requires something crucial: the ability to imagine a future use for something. You're not making a tool because you need it right this second. You're making it because you might need it later. That requires planning, foresight, a mental model of future events. That's a cognitive leap, a sign that something interesting was happening inside those gradually enlarging skulls. There is, I should mention, some debate about Homo habilis. Some scientists think they're different enough from Australopithecus to deserve their own genus, Homo. Others think they should be reclassified back into Australopithecus because they retained many ape-like features. Science is full of these arguments, taxonomists getting quite heated about which category an ancient skull belongs in, and it's all rather endearing, really. Imagine being so passionate about your job that you'll have furious debates about whether a 2 million-year-old skull fragment means something is Homo or Australopithecus. That's dedication to detail, or possibly just academic stubbornness, hard to say which. But the really significant development came about 1.9 million years ago with the appearance of Homo erectus. Now we're talking. Homo erectus was the first human species to look genuinely human in terms of body proportions. They were taller, their arms were no longer disproportionately long, and their brain size had increased significantly, ranging from 800 to 1,100 cubic centimeters. That's getting close to ours, which averages around 1,350 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus did something extraordinary. They left Africa. They were the first human species to spread across the Old World, reaching as far as Indonesia in one direction and Europe in another. We find their fossils and tools across vast distances, evidence of a species that wasn't content to stay put. And they didn't just wander randomly. They thrived in diverse environments, from tropical forests to temperate woodlands, adapting to different climates and food sources. They also mastered fire. Now, exactly when humans first controlled fire is still debated, with evidence suggesting it might go back 1,000,000 years or even earlier, but Homo erectus definitely used it regularly. Fire for warmth, fire for cooking, fire for protection from predators, fire for light to extend the usable hours of the day. Controlling fire is one of those pivotal moments in human history, transforming what we could do, where we could live, what we could eat. Cooking food, particularly meat, makes nutrients more accessible, requires less energy to digest, and may have contributed to further brain growth. There's a theory that cooking essentially outsourced part of the digestive process, freeing up energy that could be invested in maintaining a larger, more energy-hungry brain. Homo erectus also made more sophisticated tools, the Acheulean hand axes, teardrop-shaped implements that required genuine skill to create. You had to visualize the final shape, remove material strategically, create symmetry. That's not just smashing rocks together, that's craftsmanship, evidence of complex planning and spatial reasoning. And here's something rather wonderful. Homo erectus was possibly a better walker than we are. Analysis of their skeletal structure suggests they were incredibly efficient at long-distance walking, better adapted for it than modern humans. They had to be. They walked out of Africa and across continents without maps, without GPS, without any real certainty of what they'd find. Just an extraordinary journey into the unknown, generation after generation slowly spreading across the world. Homo erectus survived for an astonishing length of time, from about 1.9 million years ago until perhaps 300,000 years ago, possibly even later in some isolated populations. That's over 1.5 million years of existence, during which they watched other species come and go, climates shift, continents gradually reconfigure, and during much of their tenure, they weren't alone. This is crucial to understand. For most of human evolutionary history, multiple human species coexisted. At certain points, there were at least 6 different human species all alive at the same time, all trying to make a living on the same planet. Imagine that for a moment. A world where humanity isn't one species but many, where different types of humans live in different regions, occasionally meet, sometimes compete, sometimes cooperate, sometimes, as we'll discover later, interbreed. It's a very different picture from the simple linear progression from ape to human that we often imagine, isn't it? Evolution didn't produce one steady line of increasingly human-like species, each replacing the last. It produced a bushy family tree with many branches, most of which eventually died out until finally just one branch remained. Now let's talk about the relatives you never knew you had. Well, you probably knew about them in an abstract sense, maybe from school or documentaries, but I want you to really think about this for a moment. Wherever you are right now, whether you're tucked up in bed in London or Manchester, sprawled on a sofa in Sydney, or lying under the stars somewhere entirely else, the DNA inside your cells right now isn't purely Homo sapiens. If you're of non-African descent, and statistically most of you watching probably are, you're carrying genetic material from other human species. You're a hybrid. We all are. Isn't that extraordinary? You're not just descended from other humans, you're descended from other types of humans. Let's meet them properly, shall we? First, the most famous of our cousins, the Neanderthals. Homo neanderthalensis, if we're being formal about it. They evolved somewhere between 400,000 and 300,000 years ago, probably in Europe or Western Asia, and they survived until about 40,000 years ago. That's a successful run by any measure, 300,000 plus years of existence in some of the harshest climates Earth has known. ice ages, glacial periods, environments that would have killed most species, and the Neanderthals not only survived but thrived. Here's something that might surprise you. Neanderthals had larger brains than we do, significantly larger in many cases, ranging from about 1,200 to 1,900 cubic centimeters, compared to our average of 1,350. Now, before you start feeling inadequate, brain size isn't everything. It's about organization, neural connections, how the brain is structured, not just raw volume. But still, it does rather challenge the popular image of Neanderthals as dim-witted brutes, doesn't it? We're essentially the species that won the evolutionary competition despite having smaller brains than our closest rivals, which is either very impressive or we got remarkably lucky, possibly both. Neanderthals were built differently from us. Shorter, more robust, incredibly muscular. They had barrel chests, thick bones, bodies designed for strength and cold adaptation. If you met a Neanderthal on the street, assuming they were dressed in modern clothing and you didn't look too closely, you probably wouldn't immediately think different species. You'd think very stocky bloke, or absolutely built woman, and move on with your day. They were that close to us, physically speaking. But they weren't just strong, they were sophisticated. They made complex tools, controlled fire, built shelters, buried their dead with apparent ritual care. There's evidence they made art, created jewellery from eagle talons and shell beads, possibly painted cave walls. They cared for injured and elderly members of their group. We've found skeletons of Neanderthals who survived serious injuries or disabilities, which means someone looked after them when they couldn't fend for themselves. That's compassion, social structure, culture. These weren't primitive creatures, they were humans, just not our type of human. And then, between about 65,000 and 47,000 years ago, depending on the population, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens met. And when they met, they didn't just trade tools or compete for resources, they had children together. We know this because geneticists can read the story written in modern human DNA. If you're of European, Asian or Australasian descent, roughly 1 to 4% of your genome comes from Neanderthals. That might not sound like much, but it's hundreds of genes, influencing things like your immune system, your skin tone, your hair texture, even potentially aspects of your behavior and cognition. Some Neanderthal genes have been helpful, variants that boosted immunity to local diseases, adaptations to different climates, all sorts of beneficial traits that gave our ancestors advantages. Other Neanderthal genes were apparently harmful. They've been rapidly selected out of the population over thousands of years, leaving behind only the beneficial or neutral ones. Evolution is pragmatic like that, keeping what works, discarding what doesn't, indifferent to sentimentality or species boundaries. Right, let's talk about someone even more mysterious, the Denisovans. Everything we know about Denisovans comes from an absolutely absurd amount of good fortune and cutting-edge genetic science. In 2008, Russian archaeologists found a finger bone in Denisova cave in Siberia. Just a single finger bone from a child who died about 50,000 years ago. They extracted DNA from it, and what they found was astonishing. This wasn't a Neanderthal, and it wasn't Homo sapiens. It was something else entirely, a sister species to Neanderthals that nobody knew existed. Since then, they've found a few teeth and more recently part of a skull. That's it. That's the entire physical fossil record of Denisovans. We've identified an entire human species from basically what amounts to anatomical spare parts, which is rather like describing your appearance based on someone finding your pinky finger and one molar. Not ideal circumstances for making a solid identification, really. And yet, through the magic of genetic sequencing, we know they existed. We know they interbred with Homo sapiens, and we can even trace their genetic legacy in modern populations. People of Melanesian and Australian Aboriginal descent carry about 3 to 6% Denisovan DNA, significantly more than the Neanderthal contribution in Europeans. There are Denisovan genetic variants in modern Tibetans that help them cope with high altitude, an adaptation perfectly suited to life on the roof of the world. The Denisovans passed on genetic gifts that are still helping their distant descendants survive in challenging environments today. And here's where it gets properly complicated. Denisovans didn't just interbreed with Homo sapiens, they interbred with Neanderthals too. We've found a fossil, affectionately nicknamed Denny, who was a first-generation hybrid, daughter of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Just imagine that family dynamic. 2 different human species raising a child together in a cave in Siberia 50,000 years ago. Makes modern blended families seem straightforward by comparison, doesn't it? And if that wasn't enough, geneticists have found something even more bizarre in the Denisovan genome. Traces of interbreeding with yet another, even more ancient human species, something that diverged from our lineage over 1 million years ago. They're calling it a super archaic species, and we have no fossils, no name, no idea what they looked like. Just ghostly traces in DNA, evidence that the Denisovans met and interbred with something very old, very different, and now completely extinct except for those scattered genetic fragments. Have you ever stopped to think about how strange that is? You might be carrying DNA from a species we don't even have a proper name for, something so ancient and mysterious that it exists only as statistical anomalies in genetic data. It's like finding out your great-great-grandmother was part myth, part legend, with no photographs and only rumours to suggest she existed at all. Now, I should mention one more cousin, because they're frankly too peculiar to leave out. Homo floresiensis, better known as the Hobbits. They were discovered on the Indonesian island of Flores in 2003, and when the findings were first published, many scientists thought it had to be a mistake or a hoax, because Homo floresiensis adults stood only about 1 meter tall. That's roughly 3 feet, about the height of a 6-year-old child. They had tiny brains, only about 380 cubic centimeters, similar to Australopithecus, and yet they made sophisticated stone tools and hunted cooperatively. The current theory is that they evolved from a population of Homo erectus that became isolated on the island and underwent island dwarfism, a process where large species become smaller over generations in resource-limited island environments. It's happened with elephants, hippos, all sorts of animals, but it's still remarkable to think that there were meter-tall humans running around Indonesia until perhaps 50,000 years ago, maybe even more recently. They overlapped with Homo sapiens. We probably met them. What we did when we met them, well, that's unclear. But given our track record with other human species, the hobbits going extinct shortly after our arrival is probably not a coincidence. So here's where we stand. Human evolution wasn't a ladder, with one species neatly replacing another in orderly succession. It was a web, a complicated, messy, interconnected web. Neanderthals interbreeding with Denisovans, Denisovans interbreeding with Homo sapiens, Neanderthals interbreeding with Homo sapiens, Denisovans interbreeding with mysterious super-archaic species. All these different branches of humanity, meeting, mingling, their genetic material flowing between populations, creating hybrids, blending together in ways we're only just beginning to understand. And then, quite suddenly in evolutionary terms, all of them vanished. The Neanderthals gone by 40,000 years ago. The Denisovans disappearing sometime between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago, possibly even more recently in isolated populations. The hobbits extinct by 50,000 years ago at the latest. Homo erectus, who'd survived for over 1.5 million years, finally extinct by 300,000 years ago, possibly later in remote locations. Every branch of the human family tree pruned away, except one. Us, Homo sapiens, the last human standing. The question that will haunt us in the next chapters is simple but profound. Why? What made us different? What made us survive when all our cousins, some with bigger brains, some better adapted to their environments, some who'd survived for hundreds of thousands of years, all disappeared? Was it something special about us? Or were we just lucky? And if you're lying there thinking, well, obviously we were smarter, I'm afraid it's not that simple. As we're about to discover, the story of what makes us human, what gave us the edge, is far stranger and more mysterious than you might think. Right, okay, let's talk about something that keeps anthropologists awake at night, which is ironic really, given that I'm meant to be helping you fall asleep. But this is genuinely one of the most puzzling questions in all of human evolution, and it goes like this. Why did it take us so bloody long to get started? Here are the facts, and they're rather baffling when you line them up. Anatomically, modern humans, people who looked essentially like us, appeared roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. The oldest Homo sapiens fossils we've found are from Morocco, dated to about 315,000 years old. By 200,000 years ago, we had the full package: modern-sized brains, modern body proportions, everything physically in place. You could take one of those early humans, give them a shower and some contemporary clothing, and they'd blend into a crowd at Tesco without anyone giving them a second glance. Physically, they were us. But behaviourally, that's where it gets strange. For the next 150,000 years or so, these anatomically modern humans with their big fancy brains didn't actually do much that was particularly impressive. They made simple stone tools. Yes, the same basic technology that earlier species had been using for hundreds of thousands of years. They hunted, gathered, survived. But there's no evidence of art, no complex tools, no symbolic behaviour, no indication that they were thinking or behaving in ways that we'd recognise as distinctively human. And then, somewhere between 70,000 and 40,000 years ago, depending on which region you're looking at, everything changed. Suddenly, almost explosively in evolutionary terms, we see evidence of complex behaviour appearing all over the place. Cave paintings in Europe, exquisite and detailed, showing animals and human figures and abstract symbols. Carved figurines, the famous Venus figurines, depicting human forms with deliberate stylization. Bone flutes, evidence of music. Elaborate burial rituals with grave goods, suggesting belief in an afterlife or at least symbolic thinking about death. Sophisticated projectile weapons like bows and spear throwers, requiring complex engineering and understanding of physics. sewing needles made from bone, meaning tailored clothing, fish hooks, long-distance trade networks, evidence that humans reached Australia about 65,000 years ago, which required seafaring, planning, cooperative effort. Basically, for 150,000 years we had the hardware, but apparently nobody had bothered to read the instruction manual, and then suddenly, someone found it, and we went from making pointy rocks to making flutes and painting masterpieces on cave walls. What on earth was going on during that gap? Scientists call this the cognitive revolution, or the Great Leap Forward, or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, depending on which textbook you're reading and how dramatic the author wants to be. And the central question is simple: what changed? Our brains had already reached modern size by about 250,000 years ago, possibly earlier. The hardware was in place. So why did it take so long for the software to catch up? There are several competing theories, and I should tell you right now, nobody knows for certain which one is correct. This is still an active area of research and debate, with new fossil discoveries and genetic studies constantly reshaping our understanding. But let's walk through the main ideas, shall we? The first theory is that there was a genetic mutation, some crucial change in brain structure or organization, that suddenly enabled new cognitive capabilities. Perhaps something shifted in how neurons connected, how information was processed, giving us the capacity for abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, complex language, all the capabilities that make us distinctively human. The hardware hadn't changed much in size, but the wiring had been upgraded, so to speak. This is appealing because it explains the seemingly sudden appearance of complex behavior, but the problem is, we haven't found clear genetic evidence of such a mutation occurring at the right time. It's possible we just haven't identified it yet, of course, but it's also possible the explanation lies elsewhere. The second theory is cultural accumulation. Maybe complex behavior didn't appear suddenly. It built up gradually, slowly, each generation adding a tiny bit more knowledge, more skills, more traditions, until it reached a critical mass where things started accelerating rapidly. Think of it like compound interest, but for culture. Early on, the returns are modest, barely noticeable. But give it enough time and suddenly you're seeing exponential growth. A group learns to make slightly better tools, which allows them to process food more efficiently, which frees up time for experimentation, which leads to better tools, which creates more free time, and so on. Eventually you reach a tipping point where culture is evolving faster than biology ever could. The problem with this theory is explaining why it took so long to reach that tipping point. 150,000 years is an awfully long runway before takeoff. But then again, cultural evolution is unpredictable. Maybe it needed very specific conditions, the right population size, the right environmental pressures, the right chance innovations, all happening to converge at the same time. The third major theory focuses on language, perhaps complex language, the kind where you can discuss abstract concepts, tell stories about things that aren't immediately present, plan for the future, share knowledge across generations, perhaps that evolved relatively late. And once it did, it unlocked everything else. Language allows for social learning on a scale impossible for other species. I can tell you how to make a tool without you having to watch me make it. I can warn you about dangers I've heard about but never seen. I can share knowledge from people who've been dead for generations. Language is essentially a technology for transmitting information, and once it evolved to sufficient complexity, it turbocharged human cultural development. The challenge here is that we have no direct evidence of when complex language evolved. Language doesn't fossilize. We can make inferences based on skull anatomy, looking at the structure of the vocal apparatus, brain organization, things like that, but it's all indirect. It's entirely possible that the capacity for complex language evolved long before we started using it in culturally sophisticated ways. There's also the mirror neuron hypothesis, though I should mention this one is more speculative. Mirror neurons are brain cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that action. They're thought to be crucial for imitation learning, empathy, understanding others' intentions. Some researchers have suggested that changes in mirror neuron systems might have enhanced our ability to learn from each other, leading to rapid cultural transmission. You see someone doing something clever, your mirror neurons fire, you can replicate it more easily, and suddenly knowledge spreads through populations much faster than before. Then there's the environmental pressure theory. Perhaps specific environmental challenges forced rapid adaptation. There was a massive volcanic eruption about 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia, one of the largest eruptions in the last 2 million years. It may have caused a volcanic winter, a dramatic population bottleneck where human numbers crashed catastrophically. Genetic evidence suggests human populations went through a bottleneck roughly around this time, possibly down to as few as 10,000 individuals for the entire species. Essentially, we nearly went extinct before we'd really gotten started, which would have been embarrassing, wouldn't it? Reaching the brink of evolutionary success and then being wiped out by a volcano. Rather anticlimactic. The survivors of such a catastrophe would have faced immense pressures to adapt, innovate, cooperate. Perhaps that forced the evolution of more sophisticated behaviors, better communication, enhanced social structures. Crisis can drive innovation after all, though usually innovation we'd prefer not to have needed in the first place. But here's where I need to be honest with you. The current scientific consensus is shifting away from the idea of a single dramatic revolution and toward a more gradual model. More recent archaeological work, particularly in Africa, has found evidence of symbolic behavior going back much further than 70,000 years. Ochre pigments used for body decoration possibly 100,000 years ago or earlier. Shell beads for personal adornment dated to 80,000 years ago or more. Early examples of art and symbolic thinking that predate the supposed revolution by tens of thousands of years. What we thought was a sudden explosion might actually have been a gradual process that just looked sudden because of biases in the archaeological record. For one thing, older sites are less well preserved. Materials decay, evidence vanishes, and what survives is often just the most durable artifacts like stone tools. Organic materials, the thing that would show us art, clothing, wooden tools, they're mostly gone. It's like trying to understand modern human culture by only looking at brick buildings and ignoring everything made of wood, paper, fabric, or plastic. You'd get a very limited picture. There's also a geographic bias. Much of the early work on the cognitive revolution focused on Europe, where Upper Paleolithic cave art and sophisticated tools suddenly appeared around 40,000 years ago. But that might just be when modern humans arrived in Europe, bringing technologies they'd already developed in Africa. The revolution in Europe wasn't the origin of complex behavior. It was the arrival of people who'd already been behaving complexly for quite some time. Basically, the Europeans weren't witnessing the dawn of human creativity, they were just late to the party, which feels quite appropriate, doesn't it? So the mystery might be less mysterious than we thought. Maybe there was no single moment when we became human. Maybe it was a gradual accumulation of capabilities, innovations appearing at different times and places, slowly spreading, combining, building on each other over tens of thousands of years. The hardware, that big brain, evolved first. Then, slowly, generation by generation, we figured out what to do with it, how to use it to its full potential. The software was a work in progress, debugged over millennia, each generation adding patches and updates, until finally we had something sophisticated enough to call human culture. Or maybe there really was a crucial change we haven't identified yet, some neurological shift or cultural breakthrough that made everything else possible. Maybe we'll find genetic evidence, or perhaps future archaeological discoveries will clarify the timeline. The honest answer is, we don't know for certain, and there's something rather humbling about that, isn't there? For all our modern intelligence, all our scientific tools and methods, we still can't definitively answer why we started behaving like humans when we did. What we do know is this. By 40,000 years ago, humans were fully culturally modern. We were creating art, music, sophisticated tools, trading across long distances, adapting to virtually every environment on Earth. We were storytellers, artists, inventors, explorers. We were, recognizably, us. And from that point forward, we spread across the world into every habitable continent, and wherever we went, the other human species started disappearing. Which brings us to our next question. What happened to them? Why did we survive when all our cousins didn't? Was it our superior intelligence, our better tools, our complex language? Or was it something else, something perhaps less flattering? That's what we need to explore next. And fair warning, the answer might not be as simple or as comfortable as you'd hope. So let's address the rather uncomfortable question that's been lurking in the background. What happened to the Neanderthals? And more broadly, what happened to all the other human species? Because here's the thing that should give us pause. For hundreds of thousands of years, multiple human species coexisted peacefully enough. And then we showed up, Homo sapiens, and within a few tens of thousands of years, every other human species on Earth went extinct. Every single one. Now, that could be coincidence. It could be that climate change, diseases, bad luck, all sorts of natural factors happened to cause multiple extinction events at roughly the same time we were expanding across the world. But it does rather look suspicious, doesn't it? It's a bit like being the only person who survives a dinner party where everyone else got food poisoning, and then insisting it had nothing to do with the fact that you brought the potato salad. Technically possible, but you can understand why people might have questions. Let's focus on the Neanderthals specifically, because they're the best studied case and the mystery is particularly acute with them. Remember, these were not primitive creatures. They had brains larger than ours, sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, built shelters, buried their dead with grave goods suggesting ritual or spiritual beliefs. They'd survived in Ice Age Europe for 300,000 years, adapting to some of the harshest conditions imaginable. These were successful, resilient, intelligent humans who'd proven their evolutionary fitness over hundreds of millennia. And yet, by about 40,000 years ago, they were gone. The last known Neanderthal populations vanished, and we're still here. Why? The first and perhaps most obvious theory is competition. When two similar species occupy the same ecological niche, they compete for the same resources: food, territory, shelter. In such situations, even small advantages can be decisive. Perhaps we were just slightly better at something crucial, and over generations that slight edge compounded into dominance. But what could that advantage have been? Our brains weren't larger. Our bodies were actually less robust, less adapted to the cold European climate. If you put a Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens in a wrestling match, my money's on the Neanderthal every single time. They were stronger, more muscular, built like evolutionary tanks. So if it wasn't physical superiority, what was it? Some researchers point to population size. There's evidence that Neanderthal populations were always relatively small, scattered in isolated groups across Europe and Western Asia. Homo sapiens, when we arrived from Africa, came in larger numbers. We formed bigger social groups, maintained connections across wider geographic areas, potentially allowing for better exchange of knowledge and innovations. Larger populations also mean more genetic diversity, more resilience to disease, less vulnerability to random events that could wipe out smaller groups. In a competition scenario, numbers matter a lot. There's also the social brain hypothesis. Perhaps we were better at cooperating in large groups, maintaining complex social structures, coordinating collective action. Our brains might have been optimized for social cognition in ways that Neanderthal brains weren't. There's some tentative evidence for this in brain anatomy, differences in the organization of regions associated with social processing, though I should stress this is still being researched and debated. Then there's technology. Did we have better tools, better hunting strategies, better ways of extracting resources from the environment? The archaeological record is mixed on this. Early on, there's not much difference between Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens technology. Both made similar stone tools, both hunted similar prey. But over time, Homo sapiens innovations do seem to accelerate faster. We developed projectile weapons, throwing spears and eventually bows, allowing us to hunt from a safer distance. We made specialized tools for different tasks, showing more complex planning and division of labor. We created more elaborate shelters, better clothing, all sorts of technological innovations that might have given us incremental advantages. But here's where it gets interesting, and perhaps troubling. We didn't just compete with Neanderthals, we interbred with them. This isn't speculation, it's written in our DNA. Which means at least some Neanderthal and Homo sapiens groups were getting along well enough to form relationships, have children together, create hybrid offspring who survived and reproduced. That doesn't sound like pure competition or conflict, does it? That sounds like something more complicated, more nuanced. Which brings us to the absorption hypothesis. Maybe Neanderthals didn't go extinct so much as they were absorbed into the Homo sapiens population. We interbred extensively enough that, over generations, distinct Neanderthal populations ceased to exist as separate groups. They became part of us, genetically blended into the Homo sapiens gene pool. If you subscribe to this theory, Neanderthals didn't really die out. They just stopped being a distinct species. They're still here, scattered fragments of their genome living on in us. There's something rather poetic about that, isn't there? The idea that the Neanderthals never truly vanished, that they persist in every person of European or Asian descent, echoes of ancient cousins still influencing our biology, tens of thousands of years after the last pure Neanderthal died. Though I suppose if you're a Neanderthal, Being genetically diluted until you cease to exist as a distinct species is still a form of extinction, just a more gradual and intimate one. Then there's climate change, which seems to be a recurring factor in evolutionary history. The period when Neanderthals disappeared was marked by significant climatic instability. The world was oscillating between cold glacial periods and warmer interludes, environments shifting rapidly, resources becoming scarce or relocating. Perhaps Neanderthals, adapted to stable Ice Age conditions over hundreds of thousands of years, couldn't cope with the pace of change. Perhaps we, having recently come from Africa with its own climatic challenges, were more behaviourally flexible, better able to adapt our strategies to changing conditions. And then there's disease, which is a rather grim possibility but one that can't be ignored. When Homo sapiens left Africa, we brought with us African diseases, pathogens that African populations had evolved some resistance to, but that would have been entirely novel to Neanderthals. Epidemics can devastate populations that lack immunity, and this would have been especially catastrophic for small, isolated Neanderthal groups. There's no direct evidence of this. Diseases don't fossilize, but it's plausible. It wouldn't even require malicious intent. Just contact between populations carrying different pathogens could have been devastating. Are you still with me? I know this is rather heavy material for bedtime, but I think it's worth sitting with this discomfort for a moment because it reflects something true about human nature. We're capable of extraordinary cooperation and compassion, yes, but we're also capable of being terrifyingly effective competitors. Finally, there's the possibility that some Homo sapiens groups were actively violent toward Neanderthals. Direct conflict, warfare, deliberate extermination. The evidence for this is limited and contested. We don't find mass graves, clear signs of systematic violence between species. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, and humans, modern and ancient, have shown remarkable capacity for viewing others as threats to be eliminated. It's not a pleasant thing to consider that our ancestors might have killed their way across Europe, but it would hardly be out of character for our species, would it? The honest answer, and I do try to be honest with you even when it's unsatisfying, is that we don't know exactly what happened. It was probably not one single factor but a combination. Competition for resources, climate change making life harder for everyone, diseases spreading through populations with no immunity, interbreeding blending populations together, and yes, possibly some violence. A perfect storm of pressures that Neanderthals, despite their intelligence and their hundreds of thousands of years of survival, couldn't withstand. What we do know is the outcome. They're gone, and we're still here. And you have to ask yourself, what does that say about us? Were we better adapted, luckier, more ruthless? Perhaps all three. Evolution doesn't care about fairness or who deserves to survive. It only cares about who does survive, who reproduces, who passes their genes forward. By that measure, we won. But victory doesn't necessarily mean we were superior in any moral sense, just that we were successful in the specific circumstances we found ourselves in. And here's something that might unsettle you as you're lying there trying to fall asleep. If we encountered another human species today, would we treat them any better? If we discovered a population of Neanderthals living in some isolated valley, what would we do? Study them? Protect them? Or would we destroy their habitat, treat them as curiosities, potentially cause their extinction through sheer indifference? Given our track record with other human cultures, other species, our own environment, I'm not entirely confident we'd behave admirably. But that's perhaps too dark a note to end this chapter on. Let me offer you something more hopeful. We carry them with us. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, possibly other species we haven't even identified yet, they're part of us now. Their genes influence our immune systems, our adaptation to different climates, aspects of our physiology, and possibly our cognition. When you fight off an infection, when you adapt to high altitude, when you cope with cold weather, you might be relying on genetic variants inherited from human cousins who went extinct tens of thousands of years ago. They're not entirely gone, they're woven into the fabric of what we are. Still, the question remains, why us? Why are we the species that survived, that thrived, that eventually spread to every corner of the planet and built civilizations? What made us special? And here's where we're going to venture into more controversial territory, because some people think the answer isn't just natural evolution. Some people think we had help, outside help, the kind that comes from beyond Earth, if you know what I'm implying. I can feel some of you perking up and others rolling your eyes, but stay with me, because whether you think it's nonsense or not, it's a fascinating glimpse into how humans explain the inexplicable, how we create narratives to fill gaps in our knowledge, and who knows, maybe in the process of examining these theories we'll learn something true about ourselves, even if the theories themselves aren't. Right, let's venture into the territory where mainstream archaeologists start getting twitchy and uncomfortable. We're going to talk about alternative theories of human evolution, the ideas that get discussed on late-night radio shows, YouTube documentaries with ominous music, and books with titles like The Gods Who Made Us, or Ancient Astronauts and the Human Blueprint. And look, I know some of you clicked on this video specifically for this part, whilst others are already mentally composing comments about how I'm giving airtime to pseudoscience. Both reactions are entirely valid, and I promise we'll examine these ideas fairly but critically. The central claim of ancient astronaut theory, at least as it applies to human evolution, goes something like this. The sudden leap in human cognitive abilities about 70,000 years ago, that great leap forward we discussed earlier, wasn't natural evolution. It was too fast, too dramatic, too inexplicable by conventional means. Instead, it was the result of extraterrestrial intervention. Aliens came to Earth, encountered our primitive ancestors, and either genetically modified us, taught us advanced knowledge, or somehow catalyzed our cognitive development. We didn't evolve naturally, we were upgraded. The most famous proponent of this idea is probably Zecharia Sitchin, who passed away in 2010 but whose books remain enormously popular. Sitchin claimed to have translated ancient Sumerian texts that described the Anunnaki, beings from a planet called Nibiru who came to Earth about 450,000 years ago to mine gold. According to Sitchin's interpretation, the Anunnaki genetically engineered Homo sapiens by combining their own DNA with that of Homo erectus, creating us as essentially a slave species to do their mining work, which is quite possibly the most depressing origin story imaginable, isn't it? Where do we come from? Oh, we're biological machinery created by aliens who needed help with their mining operations. Really makes you feel special. Sitchin's work draws heavily on his interpretations of Mesopotamian mythology, identifying the ancient gods described in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts as literal extraterrestrial visitors rather than mythological figures. When ancient texts describe gods descending from the heavens in fiery vessels, he reads that as descriptions of spacecraft. When they describe gods possessing great knowledge and power, he interprets that as advanced alien technology. Then there's Erich von Däniken, whose 1968 book Chariots of the Gods popularized ancient astronaut theory for a mainstream audience. Von Däniken looked at various ancient sites and artifacts, things like the Nazca Lines in Peru, the pyramids of Egypt, Easter Island's Moai statues, and asked, how could primitive humans have built these without advanced technology? His answer, they couldn't have. They must have had help from extraterrestrial visitors who possessed the engineering knowledge to create these marvels. The ancient gods described in mythology worldwide, von Däniken argued, were actually aliens, and religions are essentially cargo cults, humanity worshipping and mythologizing visitors from space long after they departed. Applied to human evolution specifically, this line of thinking suggests that our rapid cognitive development, our acquisition of language, art, complex tools, all the things that make us human, happened too quickly to be explained by natural selection alone. Mutations are random, evolution is gradual, and yet somehow we went from making simple stone tools to creating cave paintings and bone flutes, and seafaring vessels in what is, evolutionarily speaking, the blink of an eye. The ancient astronaut theorists say that's because someone intervened. Someone with advanced genetic engineering capabilities gave us a push, modified our DNA, perhaps even bred with us to create a hybrid species with enhanced cognitive abilities. Some versions of this theory point to the interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals as evidence. We know interbreeding happened, it's in our DNA, but what if one of those species wasn't naturally evolved? What if Neanderthals, with their larger brains, were an earlier experiment? Or what if Homo sapiens were the experiment and the Neanderthals were the control group? I'm not endorsing this, mind you, just laying out how the theory develops. There's also the argument from mythology. Nearly every ancient culture has stories of gods descending from the sky, possessing great knowledge, teaching humans various skills. The Sumerian Anunnaki, the Egyptian gods, Greek mythology's Olympians, Hindu texts describing Vimanas, flying palaces, Native American stories of sky people. Ancient astronaut theorists argue this is too consistent, too widespread to be mere coincidence. Different cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years, all describing similar things. That suggests they claim a shared historical reality, actual contact with beings from elsewhere. Now, before we go any further, let's pause and examine these claims with, shall we say, a healthy dose of skepticism. Are you comfortable? Still awake? Because this is where we need to engage our critical thinking, even whilst we're trying to drift off. First, the genetic evidence. If aliens had genetically engineered humans or interbred with us, we'd expect to find evidence in our genome. Strange DNA sequences that don't match anything on Earth, genetic markers that couldn't have evolved naturally, something. And we don't. The human genome has been sequenced, analysed in extraordinary detail, and everything in it can be explained by natural evolutionary processes. We can trace our lineage back through other primates, through mammals, all the way back to the earliest life on Earth. There are no alien genes, no inexplicable insertions, nothing that suggests extraterrestrial tampering. We're thoroughly, completely, boringly terrestrial in our genetic makeup. Second, the too fast argument about cognitive development. As we discussed in Chapter 3, the current scientific understanding is shifting away from the idea of a sudden revolution. Evidence suggests that complex behaviour emerged gradually over a much longer period, possibly 100,000 years or more, with earlier examples constantly being discovered in Africa. What looked like a dramatic leap was partly an illusion, caused by incomplete archaeological records and geographic bias in where we've looked for evidence. When you correct for those factors, human cognitive evolution looks much more like a gradual process, entirely consistent with natural selection. Not instantaneous, not inexplicable, just evolution doing what evolution does. Third, ancient monuments and artifacts. Yes, the pyramids are impressive. Yes, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built about 11,600 years ago by hunter-gatherers, is astonishing. Yes, the Nazca lines are remarkable. But here's the thing. Humans are clever. We've always been clever. Given sufficient time, motivation, and labour, humans can accomplish extraordinary things with relatively simple technology. We don't need to invoke aliens to explain ancient engineering. We just need to credit our ancestors with intelligence, patience, and ingenuity. Archaeological and experimental work has demonstrated repeatedly that ancient monuments could have been built using period-appropriate technology. We know how the pyramids were likely constructed. We've found the quarries, the transport routes, the workers' villages. We've replicated ancient construction techniques and shown they work. No anti-gravity devices needed, just rope, rollers, ramps, and thousands of people working over decades. It's less romantic than aliens, perhaps, but it's what the evidence supports. Fourth, the mythology argument. Yes, many cultures have stories of gods from the sky, but many cultures also have stories of great floods, of underworlds, of magical transformations, of animals that talk. Mythology is humanity's way of explaining the world before we developed scientific methods. The gods represent forces of nature, psychological archetypes, social structures, moral lessons. Reading them as literal historical accounts of alien contact requires ignoring context, cultural meaning, and the symbolic nature of myth. Also, if you look closely, the similarities between different mythologies are often overstated. Yes, there are some common themes, but that's because humans share common experiences. We all see the sky. We all experience storms and natural disasters. We all wonder where we came from and what happens when we die. Similar experiences and cognitive structures produce similar stories. That's not evidence of shared alien contact. That's evidence of shared humanity. And yet, and there's always a yet with these things, the theories persist. They're enormously popular, spawning countless books, documentaries, television series. Why? What makes ancient astronaut theory so appealing to so many people? I think part of it is the genuine mystery of our origins. The honest truth is that there are gaps in our knowledge, things we don't fully understand about human evolution. The ancient astronaut theory offers definitive answers, exciting answers, answers that make us feel connected to something cosmic and grand. It's more thrilling to think we were created by advanced aliens than to think we're the product of millions of years of random mutations and environmental pressures. One story makes you feel like the protagonist in a science fiction epic. The other makes you feel like the result of molecular accidents, and a very long game of survival roulette. I know which one sounds more appealing after a rough day at work. There's also something fundamentally human about looking for patterns, for connections, for hidden meanings in things. We're pattern recognition machines. It's what made us successful as a species. But sometimes we see patterns that aren't there, connections that are coincidental, meanings that we've imposed rather than discovered. Ancient astronaut theory feeds that instinct, offering a grand unified narrative that connects ancient mysteries, unexplained artifacts, mythological stories, all tied together with the tantalizing possibility that we're not alone in the universe. And honestly, the idea that we're not alone, that we've been visited, that somewhere out there are beings vastly more advanced than us, that's compelling. It's hopeful in a way. If they exist, if they visited us before, maybe they'll visit again. Maybe they'll save us from ourselves, solve our problems, reveal the secrets of the universe. It's a kind of secular messianic hope, waiting for salvation from the stars. But hope shouldn't override evidence. Wonder shouldn't replace critical thinking. The universe is extraordinary enough without inventing extraterrestrial interventions. The real story of human evolution, the one supported by fossils and genes and archaeological evidence, is staggering in its scope and complexity. We are the product of billions of years of life on Earth, related to every living thing, shaped by environments and climates and chance events, survivors of extinction events and ice ages and volcanic eruptions. We carry within us the genetic legacy of multiple human species, cousins who we loved and lost and absorbed into ourselves. We walked out of Africa and spread across the entire world, adapting to every environment, learning and growing and building and creating. That story is magnificent. It doesn't need aliens to make it interesting. So where does that leave us? The ancient astronaut theory, the genetic engineering hypothesis, the lost advanced civilization ideas we haven't even delved into properly, they're fascinating as cultural phenomena, as examples of how humans create narratives to explain the unknown. But as scientific explanations for human evolution, they don't hold up. The evidence doesn't support them, and the mysteries they claim to explain have more parsimonious natural explanations that don't require invoking extraterrestrial intervention. But I'll tell you what is true, what is genuinely mysterious and wonderful. We still don't know everything about our origins. There are still gaps, still questions, still fossils waiting to be discovered that might reshape our understanding. Science is a process, not a finished product, and human evolution is one of the most active and exciting areas of research. Who knows what we'll discover in the next decade, the next century? Maybe something that challenges everything we thought we knew. Probably not aliens, but possibly something just as surprising. And with that thought, with the acknowledgement that mystery remains even in the realm of science, let's bring this back to Earth. Literally. Let's talk about what we actually know, what the evidence truly tells us about who we are and where we came from. Because the real story, the scientific story, is the one worth believing in. Okay, let's bring this home, shall we? We've wandered through millions of years of evolution, met our ancient cousins, grappled with genuine scientific mysteries, and ventured into the realm of ancient aliens and cosmic intervention. Now it's time to step back and ask, what does the evidence actually tell us? What can we say with confidence about human evolution, and what remains genuinely unknown? Here's what we know for certain. We evolved. Not just in the abstract sense, but we can trace it, fossil by fossil, gene by gene. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees and bonobos, something that lived about 6 or 7 million years ago. From that ancestor, multiple lineages evolved, experimenting with different body plans, different survival strategies, different ways of being human. Australopithecus learned to walk upright whilst keeping the option of climbing trees. Homo erectus mastered fire and walked out of Africa. Neanderthals adapted to Ice Age Europe. Denisovans spread across Asia. We evolved in Africa, developed larger brains, more sophisticated tools, and eventually complex culture. The fossil record isn't complete, it never will be, but it's remarkably good. We have hundreds of specimens representing different species, different time periods, different geographic regions. Each fossil adds detail to the picture, and the picture is coherent. There are no fossils out of place, no modern humans appearing 2 million years ago, no evidence of anything that contradicts evolutionary theory. The genetic evidence is even more compelling. We can read our own DNA like a history book, tracing mutations back through time, identifying when populations split, when they interbred, how they're related, and everything, absolutely everything, points to natural evolution. The cognitive leap, that mysterious period when we became behaviourally modern, probably wasn't as sudden as once thought. Evidence keeps pushing the timeline back. Early art in Africa, symbolic behaviour appearing gradually over tens of thousands of years. What looked like a revolution was likely a longer, more complex process. Innovations building on innovations, culture accumulating and spreading. No genetic engineering required, just time and human ingenuity. So what should you take away from all this as you're lying there trying to sleep? Perhaps just this. You're part of an extraordinary story that didn't require cosmic intervention to be meaningful. You're the product of deep time, shaped by forces both random and selective, carrying within you the legacy of millions of years of survival. The universe doesn't need to have deliberately created us for us to matter. We matter because we exist, because we're conscious, because we can look back at our own history and marvel at it. And the mysteries that remain? They're invitations to curiosity, not gaps to fill with wishful thinking. Science will keep discovering, keep learning, keep refining our understanding. Maybe we'll find evidence that completely changes the story. Probably not aliens, but who knows? The universe is stranger than we imagine, possibly stranger than we can imagine. But whatever we discover, it'll be through evidence, careful observation, rigorous testing, not through ancient texts or conspiracy theories. Well, that brings us to the end of this story. If you haven't drifted off somewhere around the discussion of Denisovan finger bones or ancient alien theories, I'm genuinely touched that you've stayed for the entire journey. We've covered rather a lot tonight, haven't we? Millions of years of evolution, multiple human species, genuine scientific mysteries, and a fair bit of speculation thrown in for good measure. That's quite a lot to process whilst trying to fall asleep, and I do hope your dreams tonight are filled with something more peaceful than Neanderthals and extinct human cousins. Though if they're not, at least they'll be educational. I want to take a moment to say something, and I mean this sincerely. Thank you. Not just for watching, though that matters enormously, but for being here, for being part of this. When I sit down to create these videos, research topics, write scripts, Record in the quiet hours when the world outside has gone still. I'm thinking about you, about the person who'll be lying in bed, tired from their day, maybe worried about tomorrow, looking for something to help them drift off that's also genuinely interesting. You're not an abstract audience to me. You're real people with real lives, and the fact that you choose to spend this time here, in this peculiar little corner of the internet where we explore science and mysteries in the gentlest way possible, that means more to me than I can properly express. But here's the thing, and I'd really appreciate your honest thoughts on this. I want to make sure I'm giving you what you need. These videos are for you, after all, not for me. So I'd love to know, are they working for you? Is the style right? Too much science? Not enough? Too much speculation? Or would you like me to venture even further into the controversial territories? Are the topics interesting? Or are there things you'd rather I covered? Ancient civilizations? Space exploration? The depths of the ocean? Quantum physics? I'm genuinely curious what keeps you curious. What brings you back, what you'd like to see next. And honestly, just knowing you're out there, knowing these videos are helping someone fall asleep or simply giving them something interesting to think about, that makes all the hours of research and writing worthwhile. But I can't read minds, much as that would be useful, so please drop me a comment below. Tell me what you think, what you'd like more of, what you'd like less of, what topics intrigue you, what questions you'd like explored, even if it's just to say hello, to let me know you are here tonight. I read every single comment, and I genuinely treasure them. You're building something rather special here, a community of curious, thoughtful people who gather in the quiet hours to learn and wonder together. For those of you who are returning viewers, who've been here through other videos, thank you. Genuinely, thank you. You've stuck with this channel as it's grown, supported it through its evolution, if you'll pardon the rather appropriate pun. You're the reason this channel exists, the reason I keep making these videos. Let go of whatever you're holding onto from today. The work stress, the family worries, the endless to-do lists, just let them drift away for now. Tomorrow will be there when you wake up, but right now, in this moment, you can simply be. You're safe, you're comfortable, and you're part of an unbroken line of survivors stretching back millions of years. Your ancestors survived ice ages and volcanic winters, climate catastrophes and extinction events, and here you are, their legacy, lying in comfort they could never have imagined, with access to knowledge that would have seemed like magic to them. I've left some relaxing ambient sounds after this, in case you want to use it to drift off to. So sleep well, dear friend, and dream peacefully. Good night, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you in the next video.